Okay. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're going to get started here. We're going to got I think a pretty significant briefing on a important topic of residential development in Maryland, challenges and opportunities. We've got 3 separate presentations, I believe. We're going to start with panel 1, our Secretary Jake Day, and Jordan Gilmore is accompanying you today. And we do have on the screen your PowerPoint, but we also have hard copies. All the members do, so we've got that as well. And it's residential development in the state of Maryland is the topic. Challenges and opportunities. Mr. Secretary, welcome back, and the floor is yours.
Chair Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, Senators, thank you so much for having us here today. For the record, my name is Jake Day. I'm the Secretary of Housing and Community Development. I'm joined by Jordan Gilmore, Senior Policy Advisor at the Department. It's great, again, to be back. This is my first, I'm sure, of quite a few appearances here for the 2026 General Assembly session. But today we are here to discuss trends and the nature of the residential development market in Maryland and some of the obstacles and challenges. And one of the things that I would like to do is to start by saying, we are not just, as an agency, the Affordable Housing Finance agency for the state of Maryland, but we're also a principal department, a principal agency. That is unique in this country. There are very few states that have those two entities as one and the same, which leads to a lot of conflict in those states around housing policy. Maryland is one of the most deeply integrated, which puts us in a good position to both assess and then act on the challenges faced in the housing market. So I want to also start by sharing with you, I spent the last couple of days at the Congress for the New Urbanism 9, which is a council writing a paper on affordable housing nationally and attainable housing nationally. And I was joined by municipal officials, county officials, representatives of national organizations, state housing finance, myself, and architects, economists, planners that are all trying to help address this challenge in all forums. So trying to help local government be the best it can be, help state government be the best partner it can be to address this. And I believe, I'm a firm believer, this is one of those public policy areas where everyone must act. We all have an imperative to contribute to moving the ball forward. One of the things that we tend to do on this topic, and this may be true of other topics, is say, well, this is a state problem, or this is a federal problem, or this is a global problem, or a local problem. The reality is it's all of our problems. And I believe we can impact it with good policy choices here. So the housing crisis and its origins and its solutions, as I heard from many other experts who were present this past weekend, is not a mystery. This is really a conversation about our willingness to do what it takes to solve it. The general sense that we don't know how to solve it is frankly a diversion to us getting about doing the work. That's not to suggest that there's only one solution. There's a variety of things that we must do. And those acts, those tasks before us will produce enough housing to house the people who call Maryland home and also those who wish to call Maryland home. And we must also recognize that the consequences of inaction are twofold. Number one, we will continue to see the most vulnerable people left in the most undignified and unsafe housing situations. And two, we will continue to watch our peer states and neighbor states solve the housing crisis for their markets, bringing their housing costs down, growing their population, and growing their economy, and Maryland will fall further and further behind. Second, I want to say that the solution to our housing crisis is not just government-financed, income-restricted housing development. So when we talk about affordable housing, that's often what we talk about. But that is just a piece of the puzzle. The market has to play a critical role here as well, and thus the regulatory environment that we create has a critical role to play here as well in order to produce more affordable, smaller size, and lower cost to buyers and renters alike housing. Maryland is not building enough.
Secretary, just so,
Please.
so for members, as we're going through, hopefully you'll, taking questions while we go through instead of waiting until the very end. So
Please.
we'll just do it that way.
Mr.
Okay?
Chair, please, feel free to interrupt me.
Okay.
So Maryland is currently not building enough homes, and Maryland has not been building enough homes since the 2008 financial crisis. After the boom and subsequent bust of the housing bubble and the resultant foreclosure crisis around 2008 to 2010, Maryland stopped building homes at a level that it had before. Compared to 2008, Maryland issues 40% less residential building permits annually, according to the Maryland Department of Planning. And as the chart on the screen indicates, while many may think the pandemic caused the problem, it already existed. The pandemic didn't help, but the problem already existed. This decline in production has contributed to a housing gap that has grown to approximately 100,000 units. And that's just the amount of units we need to properly house the people who call Maryland home today. Jump to the next slide for me. Thank you. So this chronic underbuilding has made has made housing more expensive in Maryland, and Marylanders are feeling the impact on their budgets and their wallets every month. Half of Maryland renters are cost burdened, which means they're paying more than a third of their monthly income for housing. And I do want to point out that, as I indicated at the beginning, this is true across the country, but other states are more aggressively addressing it. They're getting there faster, they're adopting model policy, and they're seeing the fruits of their labor faster. And that puts us at a competitive disadvantage. Surging prices in Maryland or beyond have put the American dream of home ownership beyond the reach of many. Only 49% of Maryland households could afford Maryland's median home price in 2022, down from 75% in 2000. And as home ownership becomes less attainable and as renters remain cost burdened, many can't afford to live in the neighborhood where they grew up. So Marylanders, particularly young Marylanders, can't afford to rent or own a home here, so they're leaving. If you look at the trends when compared to jobs in Maryland, we're not hemorrhaging jobs, we're hemorrhaging people. According to current polling, 91% of younger full-time workers in our state feel home ownership in Maryland is too expensive and ultimately out of reach. And it's causing them to choose housing elsewhere, which means their kids are in school elsewhere, they're paying their real estate taxes elsewhere, and it means that they're investing in communities and caring about communities outside of our state. We are also a very thin state. It is not far from the center point of Maryland in Howard County to a border, and everywhere else, it's even closer. Today, 42% of younger renters are considering leaving or say they are considering leaving due to housing costs. And ultimately, housing affordability is a greater concern than commute times to voters. Because we're not losing our young workers and their families just to the housing boom or tax-friendly states like Florida and Texas, who, by the way, are also changing their regulatory environments to address housing affordability, we're also losing them to those neighbors, Delaware and West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Virginia. They're willing to endure a longer commute. They're saying, when asked, they're willing to endure a longer commute, and the trends show it. To attract and retain younger workers to grow Maryland's economy, we have to provide plentiful, varied, affordable housing opportunities in Maryland, and that means building more. So what's the process for building a home in Maryland? It's pretty much 4 steps. First, you have to find a place to build a home. Government controls through zoning and other land use practices, both the location where homes can be built and what types of homes can be built, single-family detached, attached, townhomes, apartment communities, et cetera. Then the private market influences the availability and cost of land in those locations. And second, you have to find money to finance the construction. A lot of these costs, rent and sale price, as well as construction, operating costs, debt and equity ratios, insurance, are outside of our control. But government still has an important role to play in influencing the financing as well. Third, you got to get approved to build. Government, both state and local, control and influence the permitting and approval processes. And finally, you've got to actually commence construction and build the thing. 4 seemingly simple steps, but those simple steps belie multiple, complex, sometimes cumbersome processes within housing development. So for example, let's just break simple step number 2, financing, down. When building market rate housing, particularly rental housing, developers seek to generate enough rental income to cover their expenses. So nobody undertakes an activity that they are going to lose money on. If so, it's going to be subsidized by government. And obviously that's a policy choice, but that's the only other way to get there. Ongoing operating costs, these expenses include ongoing operating costs, maintenance, property management, taxes, et cetera, construction costs, so land, labor, soft costs, government taxes and fees, excise taxes, et cetera, and repayment of construction loans and the debt service associated with it. And a positive return for their investors, ultimately. They want to make money and lower returns, and lower returns aren't attractive, ultimately. If they can put their money in the stock market and do better than they can in investing in real estate, money's not going to find its way into producing housing. Supply and demand for available units sets pricing in the rental and for sale markets. So if I'm a seller and I'm selling my house for way more than comparable houses also available on the market, no one's going to want to buy it at that price point. If I'm a buyer and I'm motivated to buy, but there's not a lot of inventory available, I might stretch my budget a little further. This is pretty common sense, but these are the fundamentals that we're having to deal with. So when a project becomes economically feasible in the real estate industry, they use the term that it pencils. In market rate rental housing development, projects pencil when rent prices can cover operating and construction costs, operating costs and construction debt. The same is true for sale properties, but without the need to cover ongoing operating costs. Getting more projects to pencil and bringing more properties to market reduces both monthly rents and sale prices. When buyers, and we can offer some examples of other states that are seeing that right now, and we can talk about that when we get to questions. When buyers and renters have more options, they aren't competing to bid up the price of those limited choices. When building rental housing that is deed restricted to be affordable or low income to low income households, rent for the units is capped based on household income. So this is the main difference between market rate housing, where rents are set by the market, and affordable housing, capital A, affordable housing. Degree of need is often represented in terms of a household's percentage of area median income. For example, 30% AMI would be considered an extremely low level of income. And let me take AMI, area median income. I apologize. I'll try to make sure I do that without jumping into acronyms.
It's year 4 of the 4-year term by now. Most people, know about vice chair and acronyms,
and I do remember. I think, in fact, I've been called out on that before at this very table. So let's take a second just to get into exactly what affordable currently means in the context of Maryland's housing market, because it's not just the obvious very low income households, it's actually a greater spectrum. So rent and home prices are so high in many areas, a household making 80% of the area median income qualifies for quote unquote affordable housing. But when you look at a household making 80% of area median income, you quickly realize those are hardworking members of our community, often employees of local or state government. And these people, teachers, professionals, they are being priced out of the marketplace, and potentially the only way that they can afford to buy into the marketplace or to rent in the marketplace today is in the case of income-restricted properties. Since rents are capped, affordable housing projects only pencil when public financing reduces the project costs to support below market rate rents. And that's where programs like Rental Housing Works comes in, or housing opportunity funds in a number of counties and municipalities. And so there are federal, state, and local tools that fill those gaps or that subsidize that work. Various programs exist that offer below market rate loans. Most of those are public. There are some private partners, philanthropy, et cetera, that do this work as well. And typically, investors aren't expecting a profit from the project because they receive their financial return through the reduction of their federal tax liability, through the low income housing tax credit, or LIHTC. Often, even with the best affordable housing projects, there is a gap that needs to be filled before an affordable housing project's financing costs are low enough to pencil, even after the tool of low-income housing tax credits are used. Again, that's where our tools, like Rental Housing Works or other rental housing programs, come in. We also sell tax-exempt bonds that are state bonds. Well, they're Community Development Administration, which is part of DHCD. And then we administer or broker those tax credits that I mentioned, those reductions in federal tax credit liability for investors. All those activities provide resources to projects to fill the financing gaps to bring housing to the finish line for Maryland families. Local governments, depending on their policy and their capacity, also can contribute through things like payment in lieu of taxes or pilots, pilot agreements, and tax increment financing tools or TIF. Those are just a couple of the other ways that local governments can participate. You can see that just within the number 2 on that 4-step process, just within finance, there exists a very complex framework for how we enable quote-unquote affordable housing to be developed.
Okay, we have a question from Senator Harris.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for the brief here. So one of the things I wanted to mention is, obviously, we know this, the housing crisis. You mentioned earlier that this has been an issue since 2008, yes. Right? So it's a couple of questions here. First, yeah. Do we know what that gap was in 2008, right? Because obviously people think, some folks believe this is something that just happened, right? Obviously that's not the case. It's been something that has been going on for a long period of time, but from 2008 to where we are today, 18 years later, obviously that problem has only got extremely, larger. So I just want to know if you're aware of what that gap was back in 2008, and then how we added. It's nothing you need to give us right now, and how we added on there. And then the second piece of that question, because we'll hear a bill on this sooner in a few weeks, is when it comes to zoning, we need to build more homes. Yep. But I represent an area that 3 different counties: Prince George's, Charles, and Calvert. 3 distinct areas, and places like Calvert is not looking to, have anything additional to their, they have the open space out there, the farms and stuff out there. And so people want to make sure those areas are protected, and how we, as we build homes, man, we talking about energy and stuff like what's the plan for all those items there? I mean, it might be in your brief here, and I might have missed it, but just like, are we including that stuff in the plan? Yeah.
Well, Senator, thank you. Good questions. I can get into some of that right now, and then we'll definitely get into it later here too. But by and large, what I'd say is the solution is not to expand the geography of where housing should be built. Frankly, we've got a lot of areas that are zoned and appropriate for housing today. The question is, are we going to enable the types of housing units that people want, that the market demands, and ultimately, that the people we all serve are asking for, or are we going to continue down a path of both saying we're a proud smart growth state that will protect the areas that should be conserved or in agricultural use, or that contribute to the protection of our source waters and our beloved Chesapeake Bay? And oh, by the way, we're also going to make it really, really hard and ever harder to build in the places that we have zoned and said, yeah, that's where housing should go. Because today we're doing both of those things. And if we want to be intellectually honest about this, we have to fix this one. Because I believe firmly that we want to protect, our ecologically sensitive areas. I don't think we need to promulgate or promote low-density sprawl to get the job done. I think we simply need to say, we've kind of baked this cake for ourselves by making this as difficult as possible to do the thing we say we want to do. And I think we can fix it. I believe it's fixable.
Absolutely. And then last one, Mr. Chair, is that I agree with you on that piece. So you also mentioned that other states are doing it well, right? It's like Maryland is kind of like lagging behind. What is the one thing that you believe that we can, I'm all about copy and paste, that we can borrow still from them to say, hey, this may work here. Obviously, yes, each state is different, the caliber is different, I get it. But what can we borrow from them to start making some changes now? Since people are leaving the state to go live other places, Like, what are they doing that folks want to leave Maryland to go there?
I'm so glad you asked. I would say, number one, I'd point to the Starter and Silver Homes Act that will be discussed here in the future, and two, the Housing Certainty Act. I think those are two things that we must do. The playbook, there's a playbook, and this is one of those interesting spaces where left, right, and center seems to agree. You got what might be considered more left-leaning think tanks at Harvard and at UCLA saying the same thing as the American Enterprise Institute and Mercatus that might be considered more right of center. They all seem to agree that states should be at the table adopting policy. Oh, by the way, the best innovation, the best work on this is going to happen at the municipal and county level. No doubt about it. They're going to be rock stars at the local level. But every state should be saying, yeah, we're going to set a floor. And just as we've done on telling people where we don't think housing should go, we're going to set a floor on saying how we're going to address the affordable housing crisis through state public policy as well. Both things should happen. And the answer seems to be a menu of just a few things. Number one, enable ADUs, which the General Assembly has done. Number two, address some of the building code restrictions that exist. Maryland has some famous ones. Three, address some of the zoning and land use restrictions, parking requirements, minimum lot size, that's the minimum unit size, that's what the Starter and Silver Homes Act addresses, lot splitting, townhomes, et cetera. Was that three? Yeah, three. Number four, get your housing finance agency and your housing policy people aligned. I addressed at the front end of this conversation that in Maryland, we're one of those unique states where it's the same person, where it's one agency. And then lastly, I think this is a key, is incentivize it, incentivize it, incentivize it, be helpful. And we're trying to do that right now with the Housing Leadership Awards, the Housing Production Targets, and the HUD Pro Housing Grant that we've received. So the menu of things that states should do, Maryland has ticked off a couple, but the big ones are kind of before us right now. And I think if you look at South Carolina, North Carolina, Montana, Texas, Florida, they're not the usual suspects on addressing housing affordability, but they're doing really interesting work and they're seeing the results. Yes, Senator.
Keep on going here.
Okay.
Senator Washington.
Follow up. Good to see you. And again, thank you for all this work and reimagining how we house people. In the analysis of so two questions. One, in the analysis of the housing gap, is existing housing in that, or is this all new construction?
The analysis looks at the entire landscape of housing. So it accounts for what exists and identifies what's missing. How we achieve what's missing could include the reuse of existing building envelopes. Okay. There's a piece of legislation before Baltimore City Council right now that would enable more units in existing homes. Right. So there are ways that the existing built environment could support new unit generation, but it's not. This does not suggest that through, for example, the preservation of affordability periods will address the housing gap. That will not address the housing gap. That is important work and helps, but it doesn't address the
I guess I want
units we're
to
missing.
work through with you your statement around we don't need to expand where we build housing. There's places where housing is already zoned, but not taking into account, so for example, in Baltimore County, there was something that was created in 1967 when there was an urbanizing population, when people were moving from Baltimore City into the county, when people were moving. And so they created this, urban rural area, and you can't develop, these lines.
Yes.
There are communities that have disproportionately sort of borne the burden of development by getting rid of housing, getting rid of their green space, et cetera. So, yeah, I just want to think through that a little more and just better understand what you were saying.
Yeah. So the answer to both our desire for more vibrant, equitable, and just communities is not to consume more farmland and ecologically sensitive areas
That's an
with
easy
sprawl.
one. That's an
right?
easy one.
So I think the
Farmland is easy. I'm just saying we have to, I mean, when you first came in, we were talking about redlining, and you were really understanding that how prices are set, what's considered desirable, was created by a set of practices that, by all accounts, as well as zoning practices,
Yes.
were exclusionary, using the sort of the most generous term.
Yes.
So how does the bill, or how you're working out the availability of units attempt to disrupt this historical concentration
Yeah.
of certain types of housing in certain areas?
Yeah.
And the exclusion of rentals, for example, in other areas?
Yes. It strikes.
Because you talk a lot about permitting and
Sure.
all that, but there's also these existing practices that are absolutely counter to achieving the goals that we're setting.
Yes, totally agree. So legislation, I know we're not here to have a hearing on
This is
a bill that we will, but
This is
but
conceptual.
I would say that our objective to enable a more robust and diverse set of housing types, particularly what is referred to as missing middle housing. So, two flats, duplexes, things like that, strikes at the heart of the exclusionary environment that was once created and that still exists in virtually every zoning code in this state, where we really do segregate by wealth, segregate by economic class, which is just a continuation of past types of segregation. And so we further that by today insisting that only one type of housing is allowable in certain areas and only one type of housing is allowable in other areas, rather than being more focused on outcomes, more focused on physical form, on affordability of lifestyle, all those very things that can be achieved with some of the model codes that we're seeing adopted all over the country, and some of the, again, cross-cutting, floor-setting work that should be done at the state level that says there's a minimum acceptable standard for allowable housing types across all zones.
Just one last comment on that. So what I'd like to see is an incentive offered to locals to get rid of these things like the Baltimore County urban-rural demarcation line that had a very clear purpose when it was created, it clearly links back to exclusionary practices, which we currently deride, and perhaps incentivizing local governments to open up some of these spaces, because, again, we're not really disrupting the overconcentration of certain types of housing in certain communities if you don't open up some space. So I don't want to talk about farmland, because, again, farmland, all that's easy. That's easy. That's very clear. I'm talking about in the suburban, extra urban, areas where covenants and all kinds of things were put into place. So can we create, do you have a set to incentivize getting rid of some of these things for not penalizing, because it's there, they didn't do it, et cetera, but saying, hey, if you open this up a little bit, we could build a little more and we'll give you X.
I think what we want to see is not, frankly, I don't think we want to see housing on the other side of the urban-rural demarcation line. Ultimately, the American pattern of development is bankrupting our local governments. It is bankrupting our nation. We can't afford to sustain low-density sprawl, which is what that is. We have stretched and stretched and stretched our infrastructure with a type of construction and development that doesn't pay for it, that can't sustain it. And so if we choose to continue that sprawl pattern, it will not only exacerbate the de-densification of our cities, the abandonment of our cities, and further, what was once termed white flight, which today I think just termed sprawl, but we would be exacerbating that same trend if we allowed for a reversal in kind of the best thinking around land use. And land use as it's tied to infrastructure, as it's tied to finance, as it's tied to local economies.
I look forward to continuing. People are moving back into Baltimore. We are actually experiencing some of a net increase. And so some of those, sort of assumptions you have about the city, et cetera, people are looking for smaller spaces, et cetera. But yeah, looking forward to it, to having the conversation. But, as presented, it's just, it's not just a financing. It's not just this. People move in areas because there are trees. There's lots of things. Thank you.
Senator Washington. We're going to go to Senator Hester. Just a reminder, we have 2 other panels on this subject, and we have bill hearings, so let's just got to keep it tight. Senator Hester.
Thank you. I was just curious how you would see your perspective on the role of affordable housing. Like, what's DHCD's role versus the market rate housing solving the problem? Could you speak more to that?
Yeah, so the publicly financed income restricted housing plays a relatively small role writ large in addressing the housing affordability crisis, but not no role. It still plays a critical role because the market will never produce those 0 to 30% AMI units. Unlikely to produce most of those 30 to 60% AMI units, and even many of the 80 to 120. Once again, projects have to pencil. So there is a place for federal tax credits. There's a place for state subsidy programs. There's a place for some of the really innovative equity programs that we're seeing from some states and that Maryland's exploring now too, where we can be an equity participant in deals. So that will certainly help us create the very low end of the market. I also want to see that tied more closely with market rate unit generation, frankly, because it helps us create more mixed income communities where we see better outcomes for kids, no matter their income level. We see better outcomes for kids when they're in mixed income communities. And so I think we have a critical role to play. This is, again, one of the first statements I made, one of those policy subject matter areas where we cannot afford to pick a strategy. We have to address all of the things that need to be tackled, and being faster at state financing, being more efficient with the use of a state dollar, and having more of them available, all are important pieces of this.
Okay, why don't we do this? Why don't you go through the end of your presentation, then we'll take questions, because some of the questions that may pop up you might actually get in the rest of these slides. So why don't you go through the remainder, then we'll take questions from the committee.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I want to focus on 2 major sources of the challenges that we've talked about. One problem that stymies housing development in Maryland and in every state, is zoning and land use practices. So if a community needs affordable apartments, and we need as many as possible, frankly, good luck right now. The market is not producing them, and we have land zoned for residential use, but only 11% is zoned for high or even medium density development. And generally, zoning and land use regulations at the local level right now encourage the construction of larger homes, which our constituents perceive as a broken part of the regulatory system, producing more McMansions, right? And so they're mad when they see housing development that looks like something that they can't afford. The reality is it's the system that creates that. It's a regulatory environment that asks for larger houses on larger lots that creates that. In fact, most smaller, affordable starter homes would be illegal today. You can jump to that next slide. So when I say smaller housing, I'm not just talking about those tiny accessory dwelling units or ADUs. I apologize, I said ADUs earlier without saying accessory dwelling units. I'm talking about re-legalizing our existing neighborhoods and the kind of homes that we used to build, and the kind of homes people often demand, particularly at the beginning of their tenure as a buyer or renter, and later stage when they're maybe in too much house and looking for a smaller home, an empty nester, downsizing. We need a variety of housing options, frankly, in all sizes, but in many communities, it is our regulatory framework that explicitly prohibits the less expensive housing options. This is a modest home in Annapolis that was built on a lot that would not be legal today. It's a 1,056 square foot Annapolis home built in 1950 on a 4,600 square foot lot. Today, it couldn't be built on less than a 5,400 square foot lot. So in other words, this lot would remain vacant. Here we see Parkville. Homes are on lots ranging from 3,500 to 4,500 square feet. These homes and neighborhoods would be illegal to build today. Current regulations require a minimum net lot area of 6,000 square feet. The house in that photo, by the way, was 1,136 square feet, built on a 3,800 square foot lot, and today it would require 6,000 square feet. These aren't just tiny homes. Again, these are starter homes. These are homes for a new family. These are homes for a person with modest means who's looking for their slice of the American dream. Second major problem is permitting, separate and distinct, connected, of course. Permitting processes in Maryland make multi-year investments and predictability, the thing required to make an investment, challenging, and increase equity and debt costs. Regulations that are unclear or that are subject to discretionary interpretations that vary from reviewer to reviewer, and this exists in state and local government. Madam Vice Chair? No.
Just what we're going to wait till the end.
Okay.
Okay.
So these processes, including a lack of simultaneous review, they cause timeline delays. Lack of regulatory certainty and early vesting, meaning a project that meets the regulatory requirements and is approved, can be forced to be redesigned when the rules change. And the rules can be changed even after a foundation is built, even after construction has begun. This in particular is used as a tactic at the local level, often by advocates, opponents, et cetera, to delay or destroy a housing project. Whether it's a new application, the sudden passage of new fees, a change to the setback requirement, all of these are examples that are currently legal, but are often lethal and bring slow death to a project by continually moving the goalposts. A recent nationwide analysis shows that typical multifamily projects take about 15 months to plan and permit and 12 months to build. In contrast, planning documents that we take a look at reveal needing roughly 42 months in one county in this state for planning and permitting, and as long as 12 months through the approval process in the fastest jurisdictions. So we solved the first problem by improving the availability of land for smaller homes and denser development. Imagine if government made a policy decision that would immediately cut the price of a home by a third for Maryland families. Imagine how many more young families could buy their first home in Maryland. Imagine how many seniors could stay in the community that they love and age in place. We could do that in Maryland just by allowing townhomes to be built and sold in all residential areas. Simple policy change. Understand that there's going to be lots of discussion and debate around it, but just simple policy change. You could cut the cost of housing by a third for Marylanders. That's it. That's the policy. Townhomes for sale on the market cost 32% less than a detached single-family home of the same size. Making more land available for smaller homes and denser housing reduces housing costs. Increasing housing density also makes construction costs more efficient because it reduces land price per housing unit, or the price per buildable square foot, contributing to overall affordability. Second, we've got to improve the permitting process to promote speed, clarity, and predictability. Time is money, and establishing consistent, clear practices to reduce permitting timelines will ultimately reduce home prices and monthly rents. In Maryland, government passes laws relating to zoning and land use. When someone wants to build something, there are various regulatory review agencies that evaluate the project for consistency, city planners, county planners, et cetera. And if the permit passes those reviews, with the law as it stands when proposed, then the agencies issue permits and blessedly, hopefully, construction begins. So I want to take a look at the regulatory review stage for a typical project. You can see a couple of steps in that process here. there are 4 major buckets or subject areas that need to be assessed by 4 different types of entities. Each of these reviewing agencies is usually narrowly reviewing for compliance with specific laws and specific outcomes. And I'm sure you all know well how disparate government entities do coordinating and collaborating with one another. The entities and agencies usually vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction with varying timelines and processes, and even jurisdictions that do permitting well have room to improve. The cumulative impact is that we're slowing down the production of housing. Those delays are driving up housing costs. The academic research on this subject indicates that overall issuance of building permits is reduced 10% by each additional month of local land use review processes. So for every 10% we can increase, every month we can cut out of that process, we are chipping away faster at that housing deficit that our state is facing. Delays or lengthy processes in local housing approval timelines are correlated with more expensive housing in that jurisdiction. So reforming Maryland's permitting processes to reduce overall approval timelines by 25% could boost housing production by up to 1/3 while complementing other state housing policy objectives. It would reduce per project costs by lowering soft costs from fewer redesigns, less renegotiating, component costs from delays, land carrying costs, and it would create more market capacity. Less time to complete each housing project means professional housing construction staff get to move on to the next project, producing a higher volume of projects. And it would make the overall market more desirable. Certainty in permitting processes, I think, is also how we want to be as government. We want to be clear about the rules and say, follow them, and you get to do the thing. Don't follow them, and you don't get to do the thing. It's that simple and straightforward. Government can also play a role in reducing project costs by reducing impact and development fees. We talked about property tax incentives, payment in lieu of taxes, revising the fee payment timeline, reducing the carrying costs. A lot of jurisdictions today require the fees to be paid up front. Those are usually financed as a part of the overall deal. Thus, they're paying interest on them. There's carrying costs associated with those fees over the course of the construction period and construction financing period. And that adds more cost to the overall project. Government can also reduce barriers for low-cost construction types. For example, manufactured and modular housing that you all, in the Housing Expansion Affordability Act, allowed by right across the state is 35% less expensive than traditionally built on-site constructed housing. Maryland's regulations, like I said, permit that already, and we could enable more of that, and it is something that our department is focused on right now. So further government actions to promote housing development could include using publicly owned land for housing. The Housing is Here executive order addresses that. In the Housing Expansion Affordability Act addresses that, and the proposed governor's TOD bill addresses that as well. Reducing regulations that require more expensive construction designs. One example is permitting single stairs. Another is the requirement for parking, a minimum parking requirements. And these are just a few examples. And then lastly, increasing regulatory clarity. So this menu, this menu that other states are chipping away at, and Maryland has touched on, is the menu. It's the recipe for addressing our affordability crisis. Lack of housing production is not only the main factor, the main contributor to expensive housing in Maryland, it is also the one that is within our control and influence. We can't control interest rates. We can't control the price of lumber. What we can do is address the regulatory environment. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Vice Chair Kagan, you have a question for Secretary Day?
I did. Mr. Secretary, thank you. I had a few questions, and I'm not even going to, okay. Page 14, which is going back a ways. Could you speak to whether that is true, and if we can go back in the PowerPoint so anyone watching at home can follow along too? It talks about the delayed permitting processes, and I just wondered whether you could speak to whether this is true in all jurisdictions. Does it apply as much in municipalities as it does in counties? Are there best practices and any place that's improved it? And then I have a second totally different question.
Madam Vice Chair, the housing needs assessment that we published in January of 2025 that our department published in partnership with the National Center for Smart Growth addressed jurisdiction by jurisdiction, what that looks like. There are jurisdictions that are faster than others. We, as a state, on average, perform poorly compared to other states. And there are a variety of best practices. I think there are examples of jurisdictions that are aggressively trying to solve this from a permitting standpoint. Baltimore City's Be More Fast is an example of trying to, address the cumbersome permitting process. In Salisbury, one of the things we did was we consolidated 7 different departments the functions from 7 different departments that dealt with permitting review. Because again, government agencies aren't great at collaboration or even forced collaboration. So you have to redesign the problem. You have to design for the solution you want to get, which is faster, more efficient. So there are good examples. Something I said earlier is I'm a firm believer that the real stars are going to be, the local jurisdictions that find ways to innovate beyond whatever state law requires and whatever that minimum baseline is. But I think we need to raise the floor.
This might sound like a puffball question, but I don't mean it as such. Does your department work with, and since they're in the room, the Maryland Association of Counties, MACO, and the Maryland Municipal League, MML, to work on streamlining, efficiency, responsiveness, best practices, so that they can share with their members? Yeah,
that's a great question. And I think first I'd say we want to do a better job of that, which is the intent behind our the HUD Pro housing grants that we applied for, which is we're going to provide direct funding to county planning and housing offices and to municipal housing and planning offices to help them write better codes or implement whatever their idea is. Really, this is about innovation, so it's not necessarily about dictating. It's about finding ways to build beyond the baseline and find tomorrow's better solution.
Yes.
And so that's one way. Today, we're in direct conversation around legislation, yes, but I think we want to do even more to partner. This year, you're going to see us launch the first state housing conference, which is the audience for that is, yes, it's going to be developers, home builders, et cetera, but the primary audience is going to be our partners in government who we know are hungry to address this issue.
Thank you. Shifting to page 17, please. This, Mr. Chair, this is the challenge of waiting till the end here. I've got to go backwards. You talk about how 10% added cost for each added month, and I'm sympathetic, and we want our housing to be affordable for young families or retired folks or whomever, so people with disabilities, for all people. So are you suggesting that we you've got the categories, and for anyone listening with disabilities or something, review for local ordinances with wetlands protection, with historic conservation, with the Forest Conservation Act, stormwater management, all those have to be done. I assume you're not proposing that we not do any of those. Are you proposing that we shift from sequential to concurrent? Or what is your idea of how to streamline based on this chart on page 17?
I'm suggesting a couple of things, and you'll see three examples of what I'm suggesting that appear in the Housing Starts Here executive order. They mandate that state agencies do 3 things. One, where state agencies issue permits related to housing development. One, that we begin concurrent permit review, that agencies are coordinating and doing it at the same time and talking to each other. 2, that we digitize permitting processes. There is a state agency, and I don't want to throw any of my partners under the bus, who accepts only paper documents, then scans them in, sends them to other agencies. They're subsequently printed out, annotated by hand, and re-scanned in the future. we can do better than that. And then third, the third-party permitting review be allowed by all state agencies. And the purpose of that is that the professional licensed engineer or the registered architect, whatever is required for that particular permit, is held professionally liable to what they sign off on. And so long as they are a third party who has no vested interest in the outcome, when a state agency is not able to meet its mandated timeline for a permit review, at the applicant's expense, the applicant can go to that PE, that professional engineer, or that registered architect, or whatever profession is required, and get it done faster. It also means that we're not having to add to state budgets or local budgets for third-party permitting when that's done. And so I think one of the ways that we address this is simply by better process, not by eliminating regulation. Although I would say, I think we also want to make sure our regulations are dialed in correctly, correctly. And I heard from municipal officials today, after we met with the Maryland Municipal League's Legislative Committee, I got texts about, you really should look at the state forest conservation and then our municipal forest conservation. They don't align, and we could fix these. So I think there are probably areas where we want to align those policies at various levels of government.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm curious to continue the conversation, but we are running behind, so
Understood.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, no problem. Okay, let's go Senator Hester, Gallion, and then Senator Washington, you're going to have the last question, and then we really do need to move on. Senator Hester?
Yeah, I'll be quick, and maybe, Mr. Secretary, you could follow up, offline. I believe I added an amendment to the governor's permitting bill about this question about how much human time was involved in the digitization of these things. And I never actually saw any kind of output from that permitting work group or whatever. I don't know if you were on that, or you could facilitate us trying to figure it out, because I know several agencies that do what you just said, and so it seems like there should be money in the governor's budget then to upgrade the IT system so that our agencies can work faster, particularly with the Department of Health, which at the local level, has a delegated authority from the Department of the Environment. Yeah. And if MDE and the local Department of Health have to view something at the same time, you can't do it if it's not electronic, if you're literally shuttling back from Howard County Health Department to MDE, these paper documents. So I think having the results of whatever you guys figured out over the past year would be super helpful.
Yeah, I think you're going to hear from Secretary Flora today, and I don't know that we have answers to that question today, but I'm sure we can follow up, but I'll defer to her. The Maryland Permitting Coordinating Council has been working on that issue, and I'm sure we can get back to you with some results. And look, I know that it's a frustration, particularly when it comes to septic systems.
Okay, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Secretary. In the presentation, you're kind of talking about some of these housing units, like potential smaller units, smaller houses. I'm not sure how you equate that to if it actually means they'd be cheaper. So I guess my question is, in the upcoming legislation that you may be bringing forward to address housing issues, what in those bills will require units to be actually priced lower?
This is a great question, and I think a fundamental one about this topic. What we have seen is that let's imagine that there are two parallel kind of independent tracks on mandated affordability requirements, sometimes what's referred to as inclusionary zoning, where you got to include some income restricted housing, or any kind of price restriction, right, in the marketplace. And then two, producing a higher volume of housing, including, as a subset of that, producing smaller units. And there are experiments in both around the country. One of the most stark ones that was recently analyzed was two adjacent metro areas, Los Angeles and San Diego. Los Angeles went with significant price control, a couple different ways. One, rent stabilization law, but also a lot of inclusionary zoning requirements. San Diego said, we're going to build more smaller units. And San Diego's average rent increase the arc of that increase dropped dramatically. Los Angeles went the opposite direction. And so I think the evidence, and that's just one example, but we've seen the same thing in North Carolina. We've seen the same thing in South Carolina that was highlighted in the comptroller's report recently. We're seeing it in Texas and Florida, where when we allow the type of housing that we used to build, it hits the market at a lower price point. Now, if it's onesie twosie, if it's small, meaning small in number, if we don't produce a lot of it, it's not going to change anything. You're right. I mean, it's going to be a more expensive unit, whether it's a shoebox or not. The reality is, though, we want to enable the land that is available and zoned for housing to produce many smaller units. And when it does, we've both more efficiently use that land, and the market price point comes down. So that's the evidence that we see.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Washington, you got the last word.
Thank you. I agree with this approach of looking at the regulation, et cetera, and the coordination, and that definitely at the state level, it's siloed. But on the local level, it is not. It's very disparate. So how are we? Is a part of this sort of helping to maybe standardize, or sort of what we did with ADU, sort of setting some sort of frameworks for how one could do this? Because you do have one part of it. So the Forest Conservation Act, we actually, as the state, authorize or allow jurisdictions to create their own ordinances. So that's some of the variability. And so there hasn't been the circle back of checking, okay, do these ordinances and processes actually align? So those types of efforts, would you say, would also help streamline the process? Because even as a developer, having to go to a lot of different agencies, this is for the looking at the slope, this one is for the stormwater, this one is for, there's a lot of different, and they're all organized, and appeal processes are all different counties, and so would it help to do that as well at both levels?
I think 100%. I think that's exactly the framework that we are trying to pursue, not to hem in innovation or, again, the stellar work that's going to happen at the local level, but again, to try to build the framework, a better framework than we have today on this issue. And some of the ways there's some really innovative ways that's appeared in other states, one of which is, and at the local level too, like pre-approved plans, that particularly pre-approved plans for houses that have already been built. So if you got houses in a particular zone, say the plan for that, signed by an architect, that can be built. You don't need 18 months to review that house.
Yeah. Let's stop where we agree, because plopping a little box all in different places, like there's all kinds of other structures. So and counties are different. So even, within it, I'm just saying, there's certain steps that perhaps we could codify across. That's it.
Yeah, well, I think we absolutely agree on that. I was giving an example that I think fits that structure, but I agree with you.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Day, for that excellent presentation.
Thank you all.
Call up Secretary Flora next. Again, we're going to have to keep these presentations on the tighter side, but welcome Secretary Flora, our Secretary of Planning Secretary. Okay, who do you have with you? Who's to your left?
I have Darius White, who's our project lead with our permitting council work.
Okay, well, the floor is yours. We do have a presentation, I think, from you and a handout, so why don't you proceed?
Thank you, and I'll try to be brief in light of the time. If we could pull up the presentation. Mouse is where? Here? How do I get to the, oh, just keep scrolling. Oh, okay, gotcha. Here we are. Wonderful. All right, okay. So, for the record, Rebecca Flora, Secretary of Maryland Department of Planning. I'm here today actually primarily while I was enjoying the earlier conversation as your Secretary of Planning and your credentialed planner in the room. I am here wearing my chair of the governor's Maryland Coordinated Permitting Review Council today to give you an update and a briefing on the work that we are doing in that realm. And as you may be aware, the Permitting Council, as we loosely call it, was part of the Economic Competitiveness Executive Order that was signed back in December of 2024. And so I'm going to just hit some highlights on these slides. You have the packet, and hopefully give you a sense of what's happening in that area to give you maybe a sense of hope with where we could go as a state with some of these issues. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the purpose, the structure, the deliverables that we're focused on, and what we have learned along the way, and some of what you just heard in the previous conversation is supplemental activity that MDP is actually taking on because we know it needs to be done. So first of all, in terms of the purpose and structure, as I mentioned, the executive order, this is Section D of the Economic Competitiveness Executive Order. We are focused, zero-in on that section. And the big key word here, and I think it came out in the previous discussion, coordinated, interagency coordinated. And the other thing to really focus on, this is only about priority infrastructure and place-based projects. So that may include commercial and housing and value-add agriculture, however you want to place that, but it's place-based and infrastructure focused. It came out to some degree out of the Efficiency Council that was set up before that, but this is its own thing that's been stood up, obviously through the executive order. That acronym I will take away and just say Permitting Council is what we're going to use moving forward. I look at the council, which is all permitting and review agencies, plus it includes what I like to think of as the customer agencies, like Medco, Commerce, DHCD, Maryland Department of Agriculture. They're the ones interacting a lot with the customer. And then we also have DoIT involved in addition to the permitting agencies and the review agencies. And this was very important in this, is we have 4 seats specific to local jurisdictions, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Under that, and in the executive order, is a working group, which is essentially, quite frankly, the staff that are doing all of the processing and the permitting. Darius chairs that group, and that's where we've been really getting into the weeds to understand what is really going on in the situation. Additionally, one of our deliverables is to develop a dashboard. The best we could do in a year with no funding was a prototype, and I'm going to share that with you today. MDP, of course, is also, not only am I chairing it, we are charged with the administration of this whole process, standing this up and giving a final report to the governor by June. That's the structure. These are the deliverables. By the check marks, you can see everything that we have accomplished so far in less than a year. We are really focused in right now on the final report. And what we want to ensure is in that report, and I'll share at the very end. The supplemental activity you see in the blue box really became evident was critical because we needed to understand what other states are doing, learn from some of those practices. We needed to understand what is really going on at the local level. We hear bits and pieces, and we work closely with MACO because MDP does that anyways, and with MML. We got to have a better handle on what's going on locally, and that's what we've been trying to delve into. And so you'll see a lot of these things on the right are things we're just digging in on. We may not have as many answers as I would like, but it was important to this work to do that. What I want to give you now is a glimpse of the pilot projects. First of all, we only have 6, but they're a really strong 6. We went through a process of identifying criteria that was approved by the council, ultimately 6 projects selected by the council because our goal was to have a really solid, diverse sample size, essentially. Projects of various sizes, various types, various stages, so that we could use those as our examples of what do we need to know about what's going on out there in the field. I really want to thank all of those project owners and teams that they agreed to be part of this pilot and essentially have been with us right from the beginning as soon as they came on board. Those project teams were willing, and the owners signed with me a letter of understanding that this is what our obligations are to this process, and we did that right from the get-go. So they've been a great group that's been working with us since about July of last year. I'm only going to share with you one that I think you're familiar with. Clearly, there needed to be a data center in the mix because we needed to understand this whole topic. I'm not going to go into the topic, but what I wanted to give you an example of what we learn about these projects. Every one of the 6 projects has a project overview and gives us a sense of their timeline. We meet on a regular basis as project teams with the agencies involved in their permitting so that we can be digging in. One of the things we also had to do, and this is all manual, we had to basically work with every single agency to find out what permits basically are occurring with every project. That wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all because, and I'm not trying to make any of our agencies look bad, but it's just they do their job. But finding out what is happening for one project within each agency was not easy. We did it, and we have this type of a table for every project because that table and the data, which is a much bigger spreadsheet beneath this, is what fed into the prototype dashboard that we created. And this is what we track. We track basically the different types of permits, and there's one of these types of things for every one of the 6 projects, and each of our quarterly reports includes an update of where the status is on each of these. So I just wanted to give you a glimpse of that, but that's what we're doing for each of the projects. I want to also give you a glimpse of the tech design side of this. Keep in mind, there's structure because we have to have accountability through this council. There is the staffing of all of this. There are the project side of this because we have to have these liaisons to give these feedback loops. And there's a tech design. If someone said, well, we're just going to go build a better widget, you wouldn't solve the problem because you wouldn't have all of the information in the feedback loops in the process that's been set up through this. However, a better widget is really important because on the tech side of this, in terms of what our charge was to create both an internal intake system and a public-facing dashboard. We've been able to do that for 6 projects as a prototype, but I can tell you there's a lot of manual work in here. It is not automated at this point. This is basically just a screenshot. I want to point to that little blue bar at the bottom. If you go to this link, make sure you click that because that's going to get you into the particular software. And I really want to shout out to Do It on this. My team has been extremely involved with just getting all of this pulled together, but we've been in strong partnership with Do It to try to figure out how do we solve this? How do we get a better way of doing business in the state of Maryland? So these are just a couple slides. As you can see, you get into this particular link, you can pull up a project, see its geographic area, and then you can click on every single project or every single permit associated with that project. For the pilots, simply as a prototype, we are continuing to test and learn from this. I really need to be cautionary about that. But I wanted to give you an idea of what this is looking like. And then you can get into a dashboard, and you can really see the status in a much better glimpse and view of what this looks like. Imagine if we could do this for every project that comes into the state of Maryland to improve how to do business in Maryland. And this is the vision that I want to share with you of where we're headed and where we could head as a state. I think sometimes visuals help. The next table is really, once again, a snapshot of the discovery process we went through. This was not an audit. It was not trying to make anyone look bad. It was like, let's us understand your agency better and how your systems work now. What we found out is each agency is doing their best with what they have and the resources they have to make their systems work better. Some of them started way over here with what they're trying to update and modernize. Some of them were partway along the scale, and some of them were further along. This just gives you a sense of the fact they're all using different systems, and the systems don't talk to each other for the most part. And so it's really a whole complex, it's a really complex issue that is not, there's no simple solution. That gives you a sense of that. I wanted to touch on the supplemental, and that's local permitting, because we hear it come up a lot. Honestly, Maryland Department of Planning works with local jurisdictions a lot. We work on the ground with those local jurisdictions. We are well aware of the range of capacity, system sizes, the things that could be better, the things that should be better, but we don't have a good, I don't think, in-depth understanding of how this works. So we've taken it upon ourselves to not only build on the legislation that was passed over the last couple of years, which we are responsible for. And essentially, for these 9 jurisdictions, we are collecting permitting data. We are beginning to understand, how's that working for you? In addition, I didn't mention it earlier, but the Permitting Council, because we have those 4 seats that are local jurisdiction seats, we've actually, at the Permitting Council, not only been doing project presentations every month at our monthly meetings, and they're virtual, and they are open. We are also having an agency present at each meeting, so we understand the agency better, and we are presenting now from a local jurisdiction, so we understand what local jurisdictions are doing. We have some rock stars out there that have really already done it. They've automated their system, all the way to others who essentially are doing paper files in the other extreme. But through this bill and the work that we're already starting to do at planning, we're able to start gathering data. We also, oops, my little trigger button's here too much. So we have calendar year data now for the local situation. We've started to get a sense of average times. This is all apples to oranges. I used to be a developer. There is no project that's the same. So it's a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison, but we start getting a start on understanding the data of how long it's taking and the averages of that. So that's there. The other bill that was passed that won't start until 2027, we'll be able to collect more data, but I really want to see more of a whole systems approach to how we do this. Pieces of this here and there that, are detached aren't going to help the situation. So we need to bring it together, and that's what I think the Permitting Council has the ability to do. This is a prototype dashboard that we're doing with some of this data that we've been collecting at the local level. One of the things that we're taking on as part of an input to our final report to the governor at the end of June will be, as best as we can do, partnering with builders associations, MACO, MML, and others that we've had preliminary conversations with to get a better handle of what's really going on the ground. The other thing I wanted to share with you before I close is the research on other states. I always get asked this question, so I'm putting it in here. This all started with Fast 41 and looking what was happening at the federal level, primarily for NEPA and environmental permitting. But we had that example. We've looked at it. We've tried to learn as much as we can from it. Virginia seems to be the one out there most in the lead, most similar to what we're trying to do. And that is because, to the best of our knowledge, I have not been able to do exhaustive research. They're the only one that's doing an interagency permitting system, and they've staged it in over time. So they started with the Department of Environmental Quality. They're now up to 8 agencies. They hired a consultant, and they've basically been layering it in to have one integrated system. And they've been quite positive. Our staff has had interactions with all of these folks, and everyone's been great about sharing information. So I really have to give them that. California, the list will be quite extensive. I'm just giving you a few snapshots. The reason I wanted to give you this one is because of the AI component. There is absolutely an opportunity for AI here. That can't work until we get the systems cleaned up, because we need to essentially have a method or processes that are consistent, and then we can apply AI to some of that. I think it should be something we should be talking about, and it'll be part of our recommendations in the final report. And I think it's something that could also help at the local level eventually. This is all not going to happen overnight, but we need to get it moving as fast as we can. The other ones out there that we just listed, we've added links for you. You can see them here. There's more, but there is a lot of other work going on. Where we're at right now is to just say there are quarterly reports, 3 delivered to date, that are on our website. You can look at those and how this has progressed over time. We do presentations to the Economic Competitiveness Subcabinet. I'm usually there and on it. I'm on both of those and the Performance Subcabinet or Cabinet, so that we can all be talking to each other. But my goal is to have specific recommendations of what do we need to do, informed by real data and information that we'll have taken a year to gather. Finally, in terms of the final report to the governor, it's due July 1. I usually like to make sure it'll be in by the end of June. We kind of know. We know pretty much right now what the issues are. We know what a lot of the recommendations are. We want to take a more holistic approach. We want to reach out to builders and to others out there to get as much input as we can before we nail down some of those recommendations. We obviously have more work to do with Do It to really look at the various scenarios and approaches for the tech solutions, because there's multiple ones, depending on how you approach it. We want to have at least some initial information about local and the other states' data, because we want to have as much information as we can to the governor. It'll be a public document because permanent council is subject to open meetings. But those recommendations will set us up for timing to possibly be back next session with some very clear, focused, holistic, whole systems thinking recommendations for you all. So that is it. I hope I went through that fast enough to give you a
Okay,
sense of
thank you.
what's going
That
on.
was very efficient, and Senator Hester has patiently been waiting to ask some questions, so Senator Hester.
So I just want to start with a huge thank you, Secretary Flora, because the Joint Committee on Cyber IT and Biotech has been working on this since 2020. I do kind of wish we'd connected earlier, because we could have probably shortened your time horizon a bit. But I mean, we've focused on many of the agencies in question, and they've all been asking for more money to fix their IT systems for the past 5 years. And so I guess my question is, with the Secretary Day saying that the standardized permitting process could shorten the approval timelines by 25 to 30%, is there any funding in the governor's budget to bring these IT systems up to the point where they could actually do some of this stuff?
I'm not aware of what might be in the Do It budget. There is no money for the permitting council in the Maryland Department of Planning budget. I will say that a phased approach could make this manageable. Also, the approach, which is a conversation in coordination with Do It in the agencies, is because some systems have already been built, what we need to do is figure out how to talk those systems to each other, or take the best of what we have, spread it across the agencies so that they all talk together. And that, I think, is it's complex, and we need to figure out the best approach along with budget numbers and phasing to go with that. But this has to happen over, I say, a 3-year phase-in timeframe.
I agree 100%. Even if we don't know what exactly we're doing, it seems like there should be money in the budget somewhere to start off with the least cost onerous piece. Otherwise, what are you guys going to do for the next year?
I can't address that, Senator.
Senator Washington, Vice Chair Kagan, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Kagan, Senator Washington.
Thank
Senator
you.
Washington will have the last question here. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Flora, I love watching your delight at this nerd stuff, because we all have our nerd areas, and you are just so joyful in this. So thank you for your leadership in all the ways, and your whole team. My question, and unfortunately you don't have page numbers, so I'm going to ask your staff to try to find it.
I can find it.
But the Fast 41 model program, federal program, I just wonder if you could speak very briefly. You've got the July 1st deadline. You said you're going to submit to the governor in late June. Is there anything that's happening at the federal level that's going to bollocks up the works, that's going to cause a delay, that's changing what you're doing? Can you speak really briefly about federal modifications?
Thank you, Senator. And we'll obviously be keeping our eye on this particular system and how it works. I think for the work we're doing, no. Short answer is no. Because we initially started out as really focused on state permitting systems. Let's get our house in order, and then we can sort of look at all those other externalities, but we've got to lead.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Washington.
Same. I feel really excited about this. It was part of some of what I was talking with Secretary Day. In your, I just want to make sure there's some measures in there. You talk about statutory, the connection to statutory and permits. So are you looking everywhere where there is in statute a permit that is required in statute? And then there are these reviews and checks that are things that are supposed to happen before the issuing of a local permit that I don't think is happening. So, so I think things are being issued without an actual check. So is there a way at least to get the universe of all the things where before a conceptual plan is approved at the local level, there's supposed to be a forest delineation, for example. And then there's supposed to be a stormwater management plan. And then when that has happened, then the state gives the permit, or whether it's an air quality, whatever it is. So are there?
Let me
Have you
try to
done
answer
that
that,
yet?
Senator.
Yeah.
First of all, I would love to see a process flow
Yeah.
for all of these. When I was doing development, I would have a massive project work plan sheet where I would map that all out myself as a project owner. To my knowledge, nothing like that exists.
Right.
What the dashboard would do is create that down the road. Because we would be able to actually see all those permits, when they happened, where they interact and where they overact. We do not, to my knowledge, have that now. Now, I will say, and I really want to lift up the folks on the ground doing permitting review, whether they be state or local, are doing their best. And it's difficult, complex work. And sometimes, depending on the level of capacity, particularly at the local level, there's not enough people to really do these reviews consistently. So I'm not quite answering your question, but I think the bottom line is, this is a customer. I'm looking at it, maybe because I was a developer at one time.
It's more about the internal, not so much the
Yeah.
customer facing.
Yeah.
But in order to actually, I think, assess the permit load of our agencies, we have to incorporate those permits that are attached, or those reviews that are supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Because they may not have, that could also be something that's slowing things down. And as a matter of fact, at times could be source of litigation because something didn't happen that should have happened.
I'm just going to say there's so much work to be done.
Yeah, okay.
I think the dashboard is worth checking out.
Yeah.
Because it gives you a sense of the possibility. And when you look at this, you can sort of see through these dashboards, ways that we could be in that position. There's an internal tracking side. This is the public-facing tracking side. And I think what we're going to have to be mindful of as state is making the investments where they'll have the highest impact. There's a lot of nice things to do, but we have to move on this, and we have to hit the highest impact areas of where we invest and start fixing the problem. And Darius and I could probably name a lot of things, but let's be sure that we focus in ultimately on the high impact ones when we get started with this. And that's the best answer I can give you for the moment.
Okay, let's move to our final. Thank you, Ms. Secretary. Why don't we take our MML MACO folks next,
go.
and then we'll move to bill hearings. But we've got Angelica and Dominic. Why don't you guys come up here and come to the witness stand? We do have a pretty short handout in front of us as well. And just whenever you're ready, you can proceed.
Oh, it's nice to be back, isn't it? Hi, everyone. Angelica Bailey-Kupari for the Maryland Municipal League.
Don Butchko with the Maryland Association of Counties.
We always so appreciate being invited to do this briefing with you all, and especially some of the new folks that we have on the committee this year. It's been another interesting, exciting, and challenging year of housing policy on the local government level. So we've got a little presentation that will seem somewhat familiar, but it is updated for everyone here. As we say every year, housing is a complex ecosystem. We will do our very best. We're going to try to stay on time and on a 30,000-foot level right now, but we're always very open to questions and to continuing to collaborate with all of you. So, state governments, as we know, they largely set housing policy goals, and then local governments are the ones that are responsible for implementing them. And that's a core democratic function. We are responsible for regulating land use. That's, what Dom likes to say is the look, smell, and feel of our communities. We decide what's allowed where. We are in charge of setting development standards. And we also develop comprehensive and master plans. So we're balancing housing and transportation and economic development and environmental protections and public services all at the same time. While we're doing that, we have to make sure that these decisions can be supported by our infrastructure, not just our roads, our sidewalks, our sewers, but our administrative capacity as well. From the municipal perspective, 113 of our 157 municipalities have populations of 5,000 or less. And as Secretary Flora referenced, those are small staffs, and a lot of them are part-time. So we have to be very cognizant of our infrastructure, both tangibly and administratively. And all of this stems from community representation and democratic accountability. Zoning and development decisions are made in public, with hearings, with recorded votes by officials who must answer directly to the people that they represent and directly to the people that are living with the consequences. So local leaders have a responsibility to plan for growth, but also a duty to the residents and the taxpayers who already call these communities home. So these are all core reasons that land use authority has historically been local. And when these realities are ignored, even the best intended policy underperforms.
If I could just put a finer point on the role of local government in housing and land use, the state has charged us with doing a lot of things. We have to regulate the community, we have to make sure the infrastructure works, kids can get to school, that there's wastewater treatment facilities, et cetera. And so while there's a lot of complication there, that's the role of the local government to weigh all of that. And I think some of that is lost in the broader conversation. We do need to build, but we also need to do everything else that goes along with building, and that's what we're charged with by the state to execute that. Three things, we're just going to go through this really quick. Three common misconceptions that are coming up right now in the housing debate. First, smaller doesn't necessarily mean cheaper, and I want to zoom in on Prince George's and Montgomery County specifically. There are several instances where you have developers coming into a single family neighborhood, they'll buy a house for $800,000, and then they'll build 3+ townhomes and sell them each for $2 million. $2 million is not affordable, $800,000 isn't affordable. I think there's a lot of questions that we have to tackle with this, but again, just the idea that because we're smaller doesn't mean we're cheaper. Second, the question of Austin, Texas, beautiful city, versus Maryland, and the question of just anywhere else, North Carolina, Florida, et cetera. When we're doing comparisons of how other local processes work, how other state works, the regulatory environment and quite frankly, the priorities of those state governments and those voters are dramatically different. Forest conservation, the Bay, et cetera, is dramatically different. And so I think when we're going to conduct those comparisons, we need to recognize local governments largely are being charged with executing the policy of the state, and that's why we see the structures that we do. On the next slide, we'll talk about things we can change, but that does mean we have to change what we're prioritizing. And then third, I want to hit on right off the top, the Mako-Bambi bill, best housing bill you're going to see at 2026. And we'll touch on that. But also some of the other legislations, the governor's housing bills, et cetera, nothing we're doing right now will touch housing in rural Maryland. Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, nothing that we are doing in any of the legislation so far will do anything to make more housing in our rural areas. The only thing that will make more housing in rural Maryland is significant investment in infrastructure, and outside of that, we are not reaching the bar that we need to. That's a policy choice, and we can debate that, but I think we need to recognize that going in, where are we aiming our solutions and what marks we're going to hit and not hit. So really quick, this should be a familiar slide to everybody, and we know that you have other bills to get to. So if you think of housing, you can think of it in three buckets: what's fixable, where are there major trade-offs, and what are realities with no easy solution. So first, fixable one, what can the General Assembly pass legislation on today? What can local jurisdictions do today? What is within our power? The idea of fast-track approval pathways, idea within Bambi. Regulatory and construction certainty. This is something that was really big. I'm sure this committee remembers in particular at the end of the 2025 session, the idea of vesting investing, the idea of regulatory certainty. Basically, how can we make sure that when you submit an application, the rules don't change? The way I like to think about this is, if you're playing with Monopoly, you don't like to play with someone who changes the rules, or at least that's what Angelica tells me when we play. So it's the same thing. I'm glad someone thought that was funny. But it's the same thing when we're talking about development. When you're doing the investments, you want to make sure that the rules are not going to change. And local jurisdictions have a plan to get there. Design guidelines, same thing with the rules. Streamlining state procedures, market tools. When we do everything with land use, when we do everything with permitting, there's still going to be hurdles. And so how can we use the market tools of state and local governments to get there? All of that is fixable today. Major trade-offs. Now, this is where we're talking about other states, that Austin, Maryland. Where are we going to make prioritization? Where are we going to take away prioritization? So adequate public facilities. Are we okay with the current state of the Bay? Do we want to improve the current state of the Bay? Are we willing to make the infrastructure investments to reach two goals at once? Building energy performance standards. When we talk about making our buildings more efficient, long-term they are cheaper, but there is a short-term investment up front, and that's going to be realized in the cost of a new unit. Public participation. Are we going to continue to value that? When we talk about that the process takes so long and that there's appeals and everything else, a lot of this is based on democratic values. And are we willing to take away public participation when we're talking about development in our community? How is it going to impact the neighbors? And then infrastructure, again, school capacity, hospitals, public transportation. First two buckets. There's a universe where we can hit everything in those buckets the right way. We can get all green check marks, do everything the way we need to do. But then the third bucket, there's realities with no easy solution. There are things that are not within the control of counties. There are things not within control of the state. National, state, and local economies, the real estate market, interest rates, labor, supply chain. I think we're seeing a lot of crazy stuff coming from the federal level right now that is totally out of the control of anybody in Annapolis. But we need to realize that even if we get everything right, housing is so complex and it's so big that we still might not get there. And that's just something we need to recognize. Do you want to?
Yeah, going back to major trade-offs real quick, I just want to highlight property taxes, which is something that comes up a million times a session, I think. And it's great in theory to generate new home ownership, but I just want to highlight how challenging it can be for local governments, especially for municipalities. We rely very heavily on property taxes, almost exclusively on property taxes. And so a property tax cut impacts our incoming revenue. And so that's a good example of a trade-off or a balanced consideration that's often forgotten.
All right, so if I can get to my favorite part of the presentation, and I'm not going to make this a bill hearing, but I think everybody remembers on this past sine die in 2025, Senator Augustine sitting in the corner there and very clearly giving a mandate to county governments and to municipalities, come to the table with solutions in 2026. Don't just say no and be productive stakeholders. Counties have been working extensively, and I want to underline that, extensively over the interim with our subject matter experts, with our boots on the ground, the people doing this every day, creating Bambi or building affordably in my backyard. Senator Brooks is a Senate sponsor. We appreciate that, Senator. Thank you. Really quick, just 4 buckets that we're trying to touch on, the 4 pillars of Bambi. Land use. How can we do land use better at the local level? How can we have more predictability? How can we move faster? Because speed, time is money, and we need to get there. Market tools. Again, how can we use the tools of state government, of county governments? We talk a lot about zoning. You can come in and you can say single family, mixed use, et cetera, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. We are still a private economy. We still have the private markets. We still have developers coming in and deciding where to invest and where not to invest. And there are situations where we have land hoarding, where we're having people taking land and saying, well, we're going to build the pipes over here. We know that other folks are going to make investments and this is going to be really popular and I can just flip the land in a few years. There's a big impact on communities if you're doing that. And that impact, that cost should be recognized. How can we promote more home ownership? How can we promote people building equity, et cetera? State actions, again, counties can't do this alone. The state can't do this alone. So how do we kind of line up those two movements and get there the same? And then finally, renter protections. And this is one very simple thing. Right now, if you're a landlord, you don't have to have accurate contact information with the state or with local government. And so if there's ever an issue where we need to come in for code enforcement or public health and safety, et cetera, we can't contact the landlords all the time. And so just making sure that we have accurate contact information. On a closing thought, I do want to address really quick, there's going to be 4 major housing bills. We have Bambi, we have the 3 governor's bills. Both MACO and MML are support with amendment on all 3 governor's bills. Compromise is waiting to happen. We are at the table. We are really eager. We want to be part of the solution, but we do have to have balance, and we do have to meet all the charges that the state is giving us.
Perfect. I think that might be our best time.
Yeah, that was good. Okay, we're going to take questions for our MACO MML panel. Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Super briefly, Ms. Bailey-Thupari, on page 3, and thank you for paginating, it has an asterisk that says that housing assistance and eviction prevention, as well as unhoused services, is unique to counties. Could you confirm for me, is it your belief, MML's belief, that municipalities of any size aren't doing any housing assistance or doing any outreach to people who are homeless or unhoused?
The majority of our municipalities are not, we don't have the funds or the resources to perform those types of social services. Most of our municipalities do not have housing departments. And so we do have to rely on our counties and the state for that kind of assistance, the majority of.
Majority of. So I'm just going to suggest maybe a tweak, because Gaithersburg and Rockville, for example, do have that kind of outreach and support. And obviously, they partner with our wonderful nonprofits. I know Rockville supports Community Reach, which does emergency assistance and offers housing. And there's so many programs that do exist at the municipal level. But I totally get it that small municipalities wouldn't, cities and towns necessarily.
Well, and Madam Vice Chair, thank you for highlighting nonprofits as well. Municipalities of all shapes and sizes work with nonprofits very well as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your presentation. And that concludes our briefings for today. We're going to take a short break of how many minutes? Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we will come back and do bill hearings, okay? 10 minutes.
Mr. Chair, before we do that,
Yeah.
may I give a shout out to my shadows today?
Sure.
Thank you. We have with us Jasmine,